Before this episode begins, we want to give you a trigger warning. We want you to know that the content of this episode speaks to pregnancy loss and miscarriages and/or a viable pregnancy. We understand this content may be triggering to some of you, and you may wish to save this episode for another day. Remember, your emotions are valid, and we encourage you to take care of yourself and reach out to reliable resources for support when you need them.
And for Mitch, the recommendation, Dr. Wise, that you gave, again, when we had our first call, I remember because at the time we were new patients and you weren't aware that we were vegan yet. And I remember you saying to Mitch for his sperm health, oh, limit red meat. And we were like, yeah, we're doing all the things. So it's funny too that people, they think, oh, maybe vegan diet isn't the best. And so it was kind of reassuring to know that we were doing everything in our court to make the best possible outcome, but we still needed help.
Hi, superhumans. I'm Dr. Mavis Garcia.
And I'm Dr. Wise.
We're two of the physician leaders at Markham Fertility Center, otherwise known as Our Baby, MFC.
As fertility specialists, we've witnessed firsthand the challenges, triumphs, and the myriad of emotions that come with trying to conceive. Whether you're just starting to think about having a baby, actively trying, or facing challenges along the way, My Fertility Podcast will be your go-to resource for honest conversations and a supportive community.
So grab a cup of coffee or tea and settle in, and let's demystify the world of fertility together.
On today's episode of My Fertility Podcast, we're joined by Hannah, who is the creator of the very popular blog Two Spoons, who's also an award-winning and best-selling author of the Two Spoons Cookbook and the Two Spoons app. She's an editor at the feedfeed, contributor to the Best of Vegan, and a recipe contributor to Thrive and One Green Planet. Her recipes have also been featured in numerous magazines, including Better Homes and Gardens, Simply Gluten-Free, VegNews, House and Home, Elle Canada and Cosmopolitan. You can connect with Hannah on Instagram at twospoons.ca. Today, Hannah is joining us to talk about her fertility journey and her vegan lifestyle.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. I have listened to a numerous amount of fertility podcasts when I was going through infertility, and I feel so fortunate to be on this other side now sharing my journey. It feels like a little bit of a passing of the torch, so thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you, and we're obviously always excited to hear about updates as well, baby updates and patient updates as well.
Little update for the listeners. I just 3 months ago had my second son, and all thanks to Dr. Garcia and Dr. Wise.
It was a team effort, right?
Yeah.
So, Hannah, tell us about your journey. Tell us about when you first decided to start a family, what led you to Markham Fertility Center, and what happened while you were here.
Yeah. Okay. So rewinding a little bit, my husband and I, we got married and we didn't try having kids right away because we were living in France. But I did go off the pill right away, kind of just thinking, oh, if I get pregnant, then that would be great. I'm not going to actively try, but if I did, that would be great. I thought that I was like really good at things my ovulation, but now I'm like, maybe I wasn't as good as I thought. We just had infertility. But anyway, so we had a couple years in France, just the two of us. And then when we started talking about our family planning, we decided to move back to Canada because we wanted to be close to grandparents. So we moved back to Canada right before COVID hit. So summer of 2019, around August, September, October. So like late summer, early fall. And then COVID ended up hitting a few months later in February, March. But those first 6 months, we were actively trying to get pregnant and it wasn't happening. And originally, I just kind of thought, oh, it's going to happen. Everyone says that it takes some time. Try not to stress about it. I was doing some ovulation testing. I knew when I was ovulating, but still wasn't happening. And this happened for about 6 to 8 months before I started to get a little worried about it. So we reached out to my doctor and I mentioned that we were trying, and they say if you've ever under to like give it a year, but he was like, I'll put a referral in for you because it can take some time. And so he put the referral into your clinic. We were living in Stouffville, so that was the clinic that he referred to. And then a couple months into it, I got a call from your team that I was going to be a patient of Dr. Wise. So Mitch and I, we, we'd been going on this journey. And I remember when the referral came in, actually, I remember the doctor saying this, saying, "Oh, we'll put the referral in, but you're not going to need it. You're going to be pregnant by the time you get the call." So the first call that I had from Mark and Fertility, I remember picking it up being like, "I'm supposed to be pregnant right now." Like almost being shocked that what? Like you're calling me? I'm supposed to be telling you that I'm pregnant.
Right.
Anyway, I was very convinced that it was gonna happen, that we didn't have any fertility issues, and that, it was just taking some time. Then I had my onboarding with you, and Mitch and I went through the normal procedures where we do the blood work and the hormone testing, and Mitch did the sperm sample, and you guys checked out my ovaries, all that stuff. And then we had a call with Dr. Wise. And I remember saying to Mitch on the phone, "Are you like nervous about this call?" And him just being like, "No, like I'm not nervous. Like it's all gonna be fine. Everything will work fine." And then we got on the call with Dr. Wise, and Dr. Wise is going through our records. And sure enough, we had fertility issues. And it was almost like being hit by a bus. It felt surprising because we were under 35. Like I just turned 30. So I was pretty young for going through these struggles. And we eat a really healthy diet. We're both very active. Everything kind of made it seem like we should get pregnant, no problem. But when we talked to Dr. Wine, she was going through our charts and my side looked okay. I did have some not concerns, but I did have a low, I think it's AMH. So that was like a little bit of a red flag, but nothing like too crazy. But when we got to Mitch's side, the motility was extremely low. And there was our barrier. And I just remember Dr. Wise, you walking us through it. It was really helpful because you were so positive about it. Like the recommendation from you guys was IVF and ICSI. So that felt like a huge shock because we went from thinking we didn't have any fertility problems at all to, oh, we're going to have to do like the full IVF and ICSI process. And I think maybe I thought, oh, they'll probably recommend IUI or they'll recommend cycle monitoring or small transitions. But the recommendation, because it was motility, was IVF ICSI. And I remember I just went from thinking that I had no issues to this is a big deal. But Dr. Lives, you were so great on that call because you were really reassuring with our issue being motility. You were like, you guys have to think about it. This is a lot of information to drop on you, but it's a great problem to have. I remember you saying that. You're like, we can overcome this. And that kind of brought a lot of relief, kind of hearing that. We've seen this before, and you've seen that this is an obstacle that we could overcome. But hanging up that phone, it was like silence in the room. Mitch and I were just so shocked, and I was really upset, granted, for a good reason. Even though you had said it, I just kind of thought, like, we're never gonna get pregnant. Your mind just goes to the worst place. And I think also it had kind of brought up a lot of problem or fears that was happening in the back end that I kept pushing away. And then it kind of all came to the surface like, no, you do have fertility issues. And like, this is not going to be an easy journey for you. Um, all the meanwhile, all of my friends are getting pregnant really easily. I didn't have any friends who had gone through IVF at the time. So now I do have a few friends, not all of them, but a few friends who do have fertility issues as well and have also been able to overcome those. But at the time, they just really didn't understand. And navigating that was really interesting because you have people dropping that they're having a baby, and that's really hard for you to hear. And so it was definitely a very trying time, but that's kind of a little rewind of how it all began.
Yeah, no, I remember that conversation. And it's challenging for myself as the fertility physician as well, because I could feel how much hope you had and how much you felt like, okay, I'm doing all the things right, right? You've got the healthy habits, you're eating the right diet, the exercise and this. And then to be honest, especially when it's a sperm issue, that can be really, really jarring for couples and difficult for patients, right? I'm really glad to hear, though, that you did walk away with that optimism, that did sort of stay in your heart in that moment, because that's really what I wanted to portray. Because from my perspective as a fertility physician, IVF is not a terrible, scary thing. Now, again, that's my perspective, right? And I completely own up to that. But I knew that the pieces were there, right? As you said, you were young. We knew we had eggs. We had all those good things. And I'm so glad that you were able to feel that optimism through the fear and the anxiety and everything, and that we were able to move forward.
Yeah, I just want to say that there were so many times during those steps of going through IVF where I would get in like a bad state. But the the fact that you had told me that this was an obstacle we could overcome, that was always my fallback. I would be in this way and I'd be in this state, and Mitch would say to me, "You're not the problem. What did Dr. Weiss say? We are going to overcome this obstacle." And he was always reassuring me that we were going to get through. And it just really helped me get into the right headspace, going through my IVF cycle, going through my transfer. Whenever I would get into that scary place, I would just kind of fall back and be like, okay, I'm doing everything I can. My body is capable. And I even wrote down mantras and I would pull them out and read them. My body is capable. My body can do this. I am going to get my baby. And I would read them and it would just calm me right down. And I feel like it was the reassurance that your team gave me that really gave me the confidence that I was going to get there.
That's amazing. And I was going to ask you actually exactly that, which you have mentioned it. So from that day when you're told that there's issues that you didn't expect to when you actually started your first injection for cycle monitoring for IVF, what helped you make that mental jump from I probably don't need anything to I'm okay and I'm ready to start IVF?
I don't know if you remember this, Dr. Woods, that you said on the call, you were like, you're going to take some time to think about it. And like literally on the call, we were like, we will start like as soon as we can. We wanted to have a baby so badly. And so for us, it was like, it didn't matter at the end of the day how we got there. It was the fact that we wanted to have a baby. And of course, it was still a weight drop. I do remember hanging up the phone and saying to my husband, I can't believe that it's not going to happen naturally for us and it's going to be through IVF. And he made this comment. So, one of my old bosses, when I was working in PR, she really struggled with fertility issues, like really, really hard. And I think she was trying for maybe 10 years and it was her final IVF cycle. Like she was ready to give up. And it was her final IVF cycle, her final egg that she got her daughter. And he said to me, "Well, like, think of your old boss and her daughter. Is there anything not natural about her?" And I was like, "No, she's beautiful. She's a miracle." And when he put it in that perspective, I was like, "Oh yeah, I don't need to think of it as this scary place that's like not natural or not the way, because actually it's the miracle." And it's one of those things that seeing other people go through fertility struggles when they finally get their goal of having their child, they really are the stories that everyone shares, and everyone really does see it as like this miracle. And that's truly what it is. And so now I feel like I wear that badge with honor. I say it loud and proud. And I feel like I tell strangers all the time. Like I'm like, oh yeah, and I'm yes, baby. Like I feel like I probably openly talk about it too much.
And I think another thing is interesting is you were really set on this natural conception, which didn't happen for you, but still
Yeah.
giving your two beautiful children. But there are many parts of your journey to be a mother that were exactly how you envisioned,
Yeah.
right? Like
Totally.
your pregnancy was healthy, and I don't want to get it's your story, but I think just from you've posted on Instagram, you've been able to breastfeed, you had a home birth, right?
Yeah, and so a little joke that Mitch and I always say is we do the opposite of most people. So we get pregnant in the hospital and then we have the baby at home. But yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think for me, just based on my lifestyle, I'm a vegan food blogger, like plant-based food blogger. I really do love that holistic approach to life. And so I think that was a big barrier for me when I found out that I had to do IVF, that it wasn't going to be quote unquote natural. And I have a really hard time even with that word now. It's like a triggering word for me. So even when I was pregnant and talking about my birth, I never said I want a natural birth. I always said I want an unmedicated birth or I want a physiological birth, because to me, going through IVF and how I got pregnant, all of these ways are natural and beautiful. And the word natural just has so much connotation to it. And the opposite of natural is unnatural. And I just don't like that at all. And it's the same for birth. You could have a home birth that's unmedicated, or you could opt in for a C-section. Or, there's so many different ways that babies come into the world. And I think it's not this black and white that like you did it a natural way and you didn't. So yeah, I like to use the word unmedicated or spontaneous. But yeah, I think that I did put a lot of pressure on how I got pregnant. To your point, Dr. Garcia, at the end of the day, it really is just a gateway and a path to move on in the way, however you see fit as a mother. And for me, that was doing the home birth. I had two. So I did a home birth with my first son, Ollie. And then I was able to do it again with Mackenzie. And it was just such a wonderful, beautiful experience. And I feel very lucky. And I also feel lucky that the breastfeeding has gone relatively okay. Like I've definitely had support. I actually had my lactation consultant come last week because I was like, what's going on with my left boob? Like, Kenny does not want to be on it. I don't know what's going on. So it hasn't always been seamless, but I do feel very lucky because I know lots of women do struggle with breastfeeding and it can be really hard. There are other ways that you can bring back that holistic approach if getting pregnant is not that path for you.
And actually, I would say, even in the world of IVF, it is kind of holistic in and of itself in a way too, because it takes a village between one fertility doctor writing the cycle plan, another one doing the transfer, the embryology lab, nursing team, and then those other aspects, psychological, mental health, that care. If you're seeing somebody, is that going to be acupuncture, is it massage, a friend support group, right? When we say it takes a village, I mean like it takes a village even from the beginning. Not just to raise a child. It's nice to help create that child in a way too. And I think that that's just so beautiful what you said about the word natural and not thinking about things as natural or unnatural, that it is just what it is and that we're all just doing the best with what we've got.
Yeah, it is all magical. I mean, I did both of your transfers, and for every transfer, by the time that I'm in the room doing the transfer, all the science is taken care of. Your lining is already done, your protocol is done, the embryo is thawed, the science is done. Now is the magic, right?
Yeah.
And I always feel this like moment of, I mean, I don't know what the word is, but let's call it natural because I don't just put the embryo in there and like borrow into the lining. There is such a mysterious, beautiful force that happens into the embryo transfer, like the final step in fertility. It's not we control as much as we can, but there's so much that we don't control. So every one of the children that are born through IVF are truly a miracle because there was more than the science and the doctors to get that baby here.
Yeah, I think you said that so well, Dr. Garcia, and being in the room for those transfers, you're right. You do kind of get transported to another place. It feels very like otherworldly or almost like I don't know if you believe in God, but it feels like God is in the room.
God is in the room, 100. Like I'm getting shivers. That's exactly right. I don't want to say that because not everybody believes in God, but that's the way I feel. Like
That's totally the feeling, and that only other time I've had that feeling is when I birthed my baby. Like, those are the 2 times in my life is my embryo transfer and then birthing the child, and it transports you to this other place. It's such a special moment.
Oh, that's incredible. Now, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask about your partner, about Mitch. Can you kind of speak to how he felt about his semen analysis results? And the reason I ask is because for a lot of men, especially really healthy, physically active young guys, let's say, they don't really generally have medical issues or they're not on anything. And sometimes the semen analysis can sometimes be the first time that they're faced with their body not doing what they want their body to do. And it can be difficult sometimes to process that.
Yeah, I think this is such a weighted question, and I'm so glad that we're going here because as I'm sure you know, often the pressure and the responsibility is placed on the woman for having infertility, but it is more commonly 50-50. Sometimes it's the man, sometimes it's the woman. And in our culture and in our society, we don't look at the guys. It's always the woman's problem. And even now, because people know that I gone through IVF, I talk really openly about it, like on my social. And even now when I meet people, they'll be like, "Oh, do you think that you have fertility issues because you were vegan?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's funny because it actually had nothing to do." And it's just so
Wow.
funny that, like, it always falls on the woman that it's her issue, and definitely I thought it must be when we were getting pregnant right away, I definitely thought, "Okay, let me get checked, there must be something wrong with me." We never thought, "Oh, why don't we just get Mitch to do a sperm sample," which is truly the easiest thing to do. For Mitch, I mean, I feel very lucky. So Mitch is a very confident man, and he is not shy at all about sharing our fertility struggles. And a lot of the times he would interfere when people kind of jump to the conclusion that it was me. He'd be like, actually, she's fine. It's a fertility issue. And so I feel really lucky that he is like confident enough to share his side of it. But I will say that it was a struggle for him from the standpoint that I was having a really hard time with not getting pregnant, and I was going through depression, and I was crying a lot, and hearing about people getting pregnant was really hard for me, and it always made him feel really bad because he was like, "This is my fault, and I can't fix this problem." And I think a lot of people probably think this about their partner if they're in a heterosexual partnership, that the male is a fixer in society. That tends to be a fallback for guys, and definitely it is for Mitch. When I have a problem, he wants to fix it, he wants to make it better, and he felt really powerless not being able to fix this issue. As well as going through the IVF, like, it does fall a lot on a woman. It is a lot of cycle monitoring for her, it is invasive. There's a lot that the woman has to do, whereas the man provides a sperm sample and, of course, support and all that, but physically, it's a lot harder on a woman, and so he had a lot of guilt for having to put me through that. So, I will say that any type of infertility, it does have a strain on your relationship, and just being there for each other and thinking of yourself as a team instead of this is a you problem or this is a me problem. I had another friend who was struggling with infertility, and it was her side. She was having issues ovulating, and I would talk to her about how Mitch felt so guilty, and she was like, "I feel really guilty, like, because 'cause I'm seeing my partner struggle, and I'm feeling really guilty that I can't make a baby for him." So I think just having these open conversations and thinking of yourself as a team is such an important thing. And then also telling women that, like, to encourage their partners to get checked if they are in a heterosexual relationship. It is so easy for a guy to just go and get their sperm checked, like, and to think of all the time we could have saved if we had known a year or 2 earlier that our issue was motility, like, all that time saved and, like, all that grief that could have been alleviated would have been such a nice thing to know. So that's kind of my feedback. And for Mitch, the recommendation, Dr. Wise, that you gave, again, when we had our first call, I remember because at the time we were new patients and you weren't aware that we were vegan yet. And I remember you saying to Mitch for his sperm health, "Oh, limit red meat." And we were like, "Yeah, we're doing all the things." So it's funny too that people they think, oh, maybe vegan diet isn't the best. But actually the recommendation was to limit your red meat intake and eat more fruits and vegetables. And so it was kind of reassuring to know that we were doing everything in our court to make the best possible outcome, but we still needed help.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that because the number of times I have women that come to me and they're like, no, I'm just going to do my testing. I'm not going to test my partner. Only if we have to, we'll test him. And I always say, well, we have to right now because if there's no baby here, we got to check the sperm. And many times it is a partner. And yeah, I would echo what you said. You really got to test both partners as soon as possible because most of the time it's 50-50. And even if it isn't, like, how am I supposed to plan a treatment when I don't know all the pieces that go into making a baby, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because our protocol was IVF ICSI, but had you not tested Mitch, maybe we would have gone through multiple rounds of IUI and they all would have been unsuccessful. And even doing IV, like I think we talked about Dr. Wise, like, oh, like how come it's IVF and ICSI and not IVF? And you mentioned the motility aspect and that we want to have the best chance of getting pregnant. And IVF ICSI is great for motility issues. And so, like, you need this information. Like, it's such valuable information. So, one of the things that we notice all the time is people will say, "Oh, we're pregnant," and then they'll always drop in that it was their first try or like they weren't even trying. And Mitch and I had this conversation all the time. We're like, what is with that? Like, why does everyone have to mention that it was their first try? And Mitch was like, it's a guy thing. They want to mention that they have the best sperm and they didn't even have to do any work. And I'm like, oh my God, that is what it is. Like, it's so subversive. Like, it's so underlying in our culture that these little things kind of slip in here and there. And I think for men especially, there isn't really a lot of wiggle room or opportunity for them to speak openly about this. I think for women, and I know I'm generalizing, of course, but I see in my experience, we're just more open to communicating and talking about like our feelings and what we're struggling with. And I think generally it's more difficult for guys to talk through these things.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned a few times people thinking that you being vegan had something to do with your issues. Do you want to talk more about that? Because I mean, from a fertility specialist point of view, I could say being vegan has nothing to do with fertility. Like you don't have to be vegan to get pregnant, but also if that's a lifestyle that you have, that's perfectly fine. And you can still get all of your nutrients. And of course, you need your prenatal vitamins and your vitamin D and all the things the same as if you were not vegan, but it's perfectly a healthy lifestyle. Like we do have two podcasts on fertility lifestyles for men and women, and we don't say that you have to be vegan, but you want to limit your red meat and your animal products and things like that. So being vegan is perfectly fine, but I just wanted to hear your perspective in things people say to you, any research that you've come about. Do you ever doubt yourself like, oh my God, I got to start eating red meat now that I'm trying to get
Yeah.
pregnant?
So I definitely never doubted myself. And I think to Dr. Wise's point, the research was kind of showing me that red meat intake didn't have any benefits to sperm production, as well as THC, marijuana, like all of these, recreational activities and drinking, that kind of stuff. So not that we were big drinkers, but there were some things that we did kind of limit in the lead up to our IVF cycle. As I said, we're not big drinkers, but we do like the occasional glass of wine and we cut that out. And I think it all depends on your own comfort level because people get pregnant all the time on different diets and people will go out and get really drunk and then get pregnant. So, but I think it depends. The way that I always explain it, because a lot of people come to me asking if they should go vegan or if they should give up XYZ. And did I give up XYZ? And my feedback is always do what makes you feel comfortable so that when you go into your IVF cycle, you think, okay, well, I've done everything I can to prep my body and I have no regret. Whatever is going to happen, I'm not going to look back and be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this or maybe I shouldn't have done that. It's like, no, I did everything I could. And I think for that just varies per person. Here's an example. One of the things that I started doing was I started freaking out about stabilizers and gums and fillers in my almond milk free stuff. And I got a little bit crazy about it. And I started making all my own nut milks. And I was too afraid to buy prepackaged things, like anything that was wrapped in plastic. I was too afraid to buy. But then it got to the point where I was almost stressing more about the food and its packaging versus is this food healthy or not. So there is a fine balance of being too over prepared or being too anxious about things and just kind of going with the flow and listening to your body and doing what is right for you. So there are things that you can do like research based, the marijuana and the red meat and stuff that does have good research and everything else, just take it with a grain of salt and do what feels right in your body and what's going to make you feel like you prepared best.
And I think that's so true. I think you can apply that to a lot of things. For instance, having a chocolate cookie, right? Is that healthy? No, we know it's not, but it's good for the soul, right? Like it's healthy for your soul sometimes. And if you completely deprive yourself of all the things that you enjoy, that can cause issues. And also that, it's not that one thing that's going to completely tank your cycle. And then, yeah, you're right. There are patients who I've encountered where they get so, so super focused on the healthiest thing that you literally almost in a way kind of run out of things to eat or things to use, right? That in and of itself can cause so much anxiety. And I mean, we've seen it, right? And so I don't know, that balance, I think, trying to find that balance that's right for the person. I always kind of go back to the 80-20 rule, right? In terms of focusing 80% kind of good nutrition, healthy nutrition, but then you do have to have a little bit of leeway, and leeway is okay. And listen, if you have a glass of wine or if you have a cookie during your IVF stimulation, like nothing bad will happen and it's okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think people always just want the solution. It's like, okay, what's the problem and how can I fix it? I think it's just a natural reaction. And so that's why we're kind of grasping at straws. Oh, was it this drink that I had this time? Or was it that? Like, is it because I didn't get enough sleep? Or it's all these things that we want to kind of fall back on the reasoning. But you're right. The 80-20 is such a good way to look at it.
I'm very curious, so I'm being a bit selfish here asking you these questions, but I'm very jealous of the fact that you're a plant-based eater. I want to be like you, and I can't do it. I did buy your book, and I loved it, and I've made a few recipes, but I can't do it. So I'd like to know, how do you end up being fully plant-based, and what advice do you have to people who are like me, who are trying to do it but failing miserably at it?
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to say you are not failing miserably at it. I have witnessed you cooking from my book. You mentioned all the things you're making, so you're doing an amazing job.
And usually only lasts one day. Phoebe. I've made some really good meals, like I really have, but on the day to day, it feels overwhelming to me to only eat plant based food, but I kind of want to.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. And I think that's where the disconnect happens for most people. Like doing a diet change, like if I decided I wanted to be keto tomorrow, that would be really stressful for me because I don't cook meat. I don't know how to cook meat. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I don't know how to count my ketones. I don't even know if I said that right. Like there's a lot of factors in it that I don't know about. And I think for people who want to go vegan or plant-based, my recommendation and the advice that I always give is it doesn't need to be an all or nothing. So I kind of started dabbling in plant-based eating back in university in my early 20s because I was struggling a lot with my digestive issues. My boyfriend at the time had passed away from cancer, and that really had a toll on my body. And I kind of fell into the plant-based diet because it was a way of healing my body. My body, was recovering and doing really well. But it wasn't this like overnight thing where I was like, tomorrow I'm gonna wake up and I'm just gonna like eat all vegan food. It was a slow transition. And I would say it took 5 or 6 years. I loved cheese and fish, and it was really hard for me to stop eating it. And it wasn't until I got confident enough in my cooking where I was like, oh, like I can do all of these substitutes for cheese and not miss it, that I could give that up. And also my husband, so he was a big meat eater when we first met. And when I told him I wanted to go vegan, he was not so pleased because I do all the cooking. So he was pretty hesitant. And even now, I'm always say he's vegan by default, but every once in a while he'll have a little bit of cheese or a little bit of eggs. So he's 95% vegan. But to think of where he was versus where he is now, he has done so much change. And I like fully embrace the way that he wants to eat. And I don't think it needs to be this black or white. Like if cook vegan at home, but when you're out, you want to embrace fish, or you're on vacation and you want to try the local oysters or whatever it is. I think that that is amazing and you should do that. I think when it comes to veganism, it really is kind of seen as this black and white, but I like to kind of tell people, think of all the things that you're doing towards that goal. And Dr. Garcia, you having that one day where you ate vegan, you didn't eat any meat that day. That's a win. That's a step in the right direction. And then maybe you'll go 2 days where you eat vegan, or maybe you'll only eat meat on Saturdays, and that is such a win. That to me, those are my favorite people who visit my blog, is when they come on the blog and they say, I cook this for my husband or my partner or my kid, and they're meat eaters and they told me that they loved it and they didn't even miss the meat. That to me is my favorite customer, like my favorite person who follower who comes to my blog, or those types of people.
Well, I'll tell you, your artichoke dip. My dad is not vegan, but he's lactose intolerant. So I made it once for a family event, and everybody was like, over the moon over it. And now I would never do any other artichoke dip recipes other than yours.
That one is so good, and I don't know if you tried the baked brie from the cookbook,
Yes,
but
yes.
oh,
Another favorite of mine, it's the stuffed ricotta. It's not real ricotta,
oh,
but
yeah,
the
my god. Like, literally, I make the artichoke dip and that, and everyone just comes and it's just gone. Like,
stuffed ricotta shell. Oh my God,
yeah,
that
that is
soy
so good.
ricotta, it's
I
like
know. It's
next
really good
level.
in lasagna too. You could use it in your lasagna next time. It's so good.
I'm gonna try and substitute it. So my husband's Italian. I'm gonna try and sneak it into my husband's lasagna, and we'll see what happens if he'll
Oh my
notice.
gosh. I love
I
that.
doubt
Like,
it.
yeah, just see if he'll notice because a lot of the time people don't even know.
I feel like
Like
he might not notice.
He
Like
wouldn't
it's
notice.
yeah.
Him, no. Yeah.
everyone always thinks that the plant-based diet is really expensive, and it's actually not. Like, it's mostly beans, rice, legumes. Obviously, vegetables right now are getting really expensive, but
Mm,
it's summertime. I've just planted my vegetable garden. I've got my herbs going. There are ways that we can kind of reduce the cost there. But
mhm,
mostly when you're looking at your grocery shopping list, it's the cheaper meats that cost so much.
mhm,
Mhm.
mhm. For
Mhm,
sure, for
Absolutely.
sure.
I really want to go make your
mhm.
artichoke chip now.
Oh
I
my god,
haven't done
it's
it.
really
I'm gonna take a look for it now.
It's
really good, and it's
amazing.
easy. Yeah, it's an easy one.
So tell us, Hannah, just to wrap up, you've been through such a journey from being, I'm sure nothing's wrong with me, to doing IVF and Nixon, having two beautiful little boys. What advice would you have with somebody who is at the beginning of the journey, kind of feeling the way you were feeling back in the day?
Yeah, so when you ask that, I feel like my heart just really just had an ache in it because I can really relate to anyone who is going through infertility and they're in the throes of it. Like, it was one of the hardest things I've ever been through in my life. And it was hard on so many levels, on a personal level, on a relationship level with my husband. It's a very difficult journey to navigate through. So, my feedback to people, I have a couple things. One is find people in your network who are going through it too. And if there's no one in your network, we were pretty young. We didn't have any friends that were going through it. I did have some bosses that I reached out to who were older than me who had been through it, but no one that I was super, super close with. I found things like this, like podcasts, really, really helpful. It just made me feel so much less alone because I felt so lonely and isolated going through it. And finding networks on Instagram and podcasts to listen to where people were kind of telling their stories, it just really made me feel like there were other people out there. And it also gave me hope that I could be on the other side one day too. So I would say find a network, whether it's online or in person, I think is really important. And then the second piece of advice is that it's okay to create some walls and barriers in this time. Like I mentioned, I had a lot of friends who were getting pregnant and there were a lot of baby showers. And for people who may not have gone through the fertility journey, it can be hard for them to kind of understand or relate to what you're going through. And that can be really hard because people that you may have, reached out to in the past, like best friends, they might not be able to provide the support that you need at this time. And that's okay. The way my mom explained it to me is your friends come in different phases of your life, they'll come back and be helpful in other aspects. And when I became a mom, they were those people that, I felt that then I was able to reconnect with. But during the time where I was going through infertility, I did have to kind of create some barriers where I would be invited to barbecue, but it was too painful because I knew there were going to be a lot of babies there. So I just said no. And it's okay to say no. Like, you have to protect your heart and you have to do what you need to do to get through this time. And there might be some people who have kids that you love to go see, like my sister, for example. She had a daughter but she really understood and had compassion and created space for me to grieve. So seeing her didn't have that same amount of heaviness. So just, you find those relationships that are bringing you joy and find your people in your network because it is a really hard time. And keep the hope that it can happen for you in whatever capacity that is. Like, I have a friend who struggled with infertility for 10 years. She had rheumatoid arthritis. She went through hell on earth. And she just adopted her daughter back in September. And it is the most gorgeous, the most gorgeous family I've ever seen in my life. Like, she is so happy. So, however you become a mom, if you're meant to be a mom and you know that you want this, it's going to happen for you. And even though you don't know the outcome of how it's going to happen, you're going to make it happen because you are that person. And find the people who are going to support you in that.
Ah, that's so beautiful.
So well said.
That's really wonderful advice. And I know for a fact that there are going to be people who are going to be listening to this podcast who are in the depths, who are in the throes of fertility in that dark place. And I really think that that advice is going to mean a lot to them.
I really like to kind of tell people that because I am a very happy, optimistic person, and I do come across like that on my socials. But I had a really hard time. I really struggled, and it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to say that you need help. I was really having a hard time, and it was weighing more on my relationship with my husband, and I needed a channel to get out that sadness and not bring him down every time. So if you need to find an outlet, and maybe it's not a therapist for you, maybe it's your mom or maybe it's your friend, don't be afraid to ask for help because it is a really hard thing that you're going through and you deserve to be listened to and to be heard and to have that support.
Absolutely. Everyone deserves to have that support. I can't emphasize it enough. I talk about it too. When I was going through my journey, I was embarrassed because I was a fertility specialist. And I thought that if I share, people would think I'm less of a fertility doctor and less knowledgeable and less capable. I know it sounds so crazy. But at the time, that's what I convinced myself that, sharing it would just bring the end of my career. It's so silly to think about it, but it shows how when you're in it, sometimes your brain thinks things that aren't really true. And I did share after the fact. And even though I already had two children when I share, it's what healed me at the end of the day. Is being able to share that and get that support, even if it happened after the fact.
Yeah, and just to close, because I really want to say this, is I have never experienced or speaking with people like the team that you guys have at Markham Fertility. There's so much compassion and understanding behind what you do, and you can feel it, like, it radiates from all of you there. I talk to other friends who are going through fertility issues, and their clinics do not respond to their patients in the same way, and Dr. Garcia, I think it's because of your experience of going through that, and Dr. Wise, I think that you're just, like, an incredibly compassionate person, and maybe knowing Dr. Garcia's story and seeing all your patients, you have that as well where you really do empathize with your patients and it's not the norm and it really helps people get through this really hard time. And Dr. Garcia, like the amount of times I would read the pages that you would post on Instagram, like the poems that you wrote, like everything, like, and it really resonates so much with your patients. So I just want to say thank you. And I think that you guys are the best clinic on earth. I literally tell everyone to go to you. I have so many friends who couldn't get pregnant and then they came to you and now have their babies. Like, it's what I was like, you guys are miracle workers.
We do have the coolest job in the world. I will say that. I think we do have the coolest job in the world because, to Dr. Garcia's point, that moment when you're doing the embryo transfer, I totally you feel it. There is just something otherworldly about the whole experience. And that's why I love my job.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
guys have the best job. And okay, so you guys don't know this story, but like your whole team. So there, one time I was in the grocery store and I saw the embryologist who worked on our embryos in the grocery store. And I got so excited. And I was like, kind of like, should I say hi? Should I not say hi? And she was looking at me like I was crazy. And I was looking at her like she was like a famous celebrity. Like, I feel like you guys are like famous in my head. Like, like you are literally just like the most amazing. There's nobody I would rather want to be friends with more than like everyone who works at your clinic.
We do have an incredible team here. We're very, very lucky.
Absolutely. That's so sweet. Aw. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing your story and giving me some tips about how I can. I'm not going to go hardcore anymore because I think that's my problem. I'm very black and white. So when I said I'm going to do it, I
Yeah.
go too strong. But I am going to continue to get some recipes from your books. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your book just before we close?
Yeah, so my cookbook is called the Two Spoons Cookbook, and you can get it on Amazon or Indigo or wherever you buy books. You can also get my recipes on my website, Two Spoons, and I also have an app, the Two Spoons app. So feel free to peruse around. The cookbook is all French-inspired plant-based recipes from my time abroad, and I think it's some of the best work I've ever done, and I think you'll love the recipes. But if you want to dabble on the website as well, there's lots of great ones. You guys can get artichoke dip there. It's so good.
My husband and I lived in London when we were in residency, and we used to go to this restaurant, always go the artichoke dip, which was the traditional, like, cheesy one. So when I had to make something in my home and my dad is lactose intolerant, my husband is like, yeah, there's no way you can make an artichoke dip. That's not cheesy. I was like, just wait for it. And now he will not ever order artichoke dip at any restaurant. It has to be the one I make.
So good. Oh my God, I love that so much. It's such a good story.
So for anybody listening, check out the blog and check out the cookbook. It's amazing.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
5-star review from the mystery of Dr. Garcia.
Who is a very picky eater, by the way.
And I will report back about the Italian family on my husband's side.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It was lovely to have you.
Thank you as well. I feel so honored to be here.
Thank you. And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast or visit us online at myconfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episodes.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss. Music from Mix Kit Raising Me Higher by Audrey Stellino. My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.